This is Spirit Warrior, Book 2 in the Spirit Pass series, by S.E. Smith. Read by Samantha Cook. Chapter 1. Montana, 1867. Jacob Tucker pulled back on the reins of his horse and studied the narrow cut of the pass. A shiver ran down his spine as his eyes moved up the jagged rock entrance. He had been up in these mountains numerous times before, but had never come across this narrow pass. That really didn't mean much. The mountains were filled with things you could walk or ride right by and never see. Jacob looked over his shoulder and nodded silently to his twin brother, Jonathan. His brother had felt the change as well. Something was definitely unusual about the pass they were riding through. Jacob turned back around, lost in thought as he replayed the events leading up to the small group being here. If he thought their lives had changed since a stubborn, unusual female suddenly appeared, it was nothing compared to what it was about to. His eyes flickered to the stranger sitting slightly ahead of him and his brother. Billy Cloudrunner, he thought as he stared at Billy's back. This was one Indian unlike any he had met. Hell, the man riding on Jonathan's horse was unlike any man he'd ever seen before. He spoke, but Jacob only understood about every 3 words or so, and it wasn't because he was speaking Lakota. No, Billy was speaking English, but it wasn't any English words Jacob had ever heard before. He was talking about things like night vision goggles, trucks, and something called Monday Night Football on television. Billy turned in his saddle where he was leading the small group and gave him a crooked grin. The crookedness might have been partially due to the swelling in his jaw where Jonathan had hit him. Still, there was a wry amusement in the man's eye that shouldn't have been there, as if he didn't realize just how much danger he was in. "It gets scarier once you go in," Billy called out, gazing up at the narrow slit. "My old man isn't going to believe me when I tell him I actually went all the way through the pass to the other side and came out in one piece." "How far is it to the other side?" Jacob asked as Jonathan pulled Midnight, the black horse that belonged to his missing wife, up beside him. "I don't know," Billy replied, scratching his left arm. "About a mile or so, I'd say. I was never very good at judging distances." "Let's go," Jonathan snapped as he pulled back so he could take the back. "The longer we wait, the further the men who took Indy will get." Billy shook his head. "I'm really sorry about this," he grumbled as he tapped his heels into the horse's side and took the lead. "I like Indy. I didn't know that she was what they were after. Indy got a really rotten deal. Everyone in town thinks her brothers are nothing but a pile of horse shit." Jacob could feel the tension radiating from his brother. If Billy wasn't careful, and if he hadn't been so needed, Jonathan would have put a bullet through the back of Billy's head for admitting he had been the one to lead the other 2 men to Indy. He leaned forward in his saddle and patted the neck of his horse when it danced at the entrance to the pass. Indiana Wilde had shown up at his and Jonathan's ranch several months ago. She'd arrived in just the nick of time to save 2 of their men and a large herd of cattle from some cattle rustlers. Jake, one of the men that worked on the ranch, had been shot during the attack. Indy had patched up the old man and stayed on to help out. When Jonathan arrived the next day, he had hired Indy on as a cowpuncher. Fortunately for Jonathan, Jacob hadn't been there when she first arrived. He had to admit that it was probably a good thing. If he had been, Jonathan might have had a bit more of a fight on his hands other than the one he got with Indy. From what he'd learned before he arrived, Jonathan and every other cowpuncher had thought Indy was a young boy. Hell, Jonathan had even kept Indy out on the range longer than he normally did the other men. It would appear Indy's brisk attitude had rubbed Jonathan the wrong way. It had been Jake's frantic tale of discovering a naked woman working on the roof of the old cabin down by the river that had finally revealed that the rude boy was actually a very unusual woman. Jacob had just returned home and had barely gotten
Sample complete. Ready to continue?